most of the people I spoke with, to be blunt, they said the fentanyl is probably going across the border into Canada more than it's coming from Canada into the United States. They admitted that. They absolutely said that. They said this is not what it's about. I had a member tell me that he said, and this was really good as far as I was concerned. He said, you know what, his sources higher up in the government in the United States are saying they don't think they're going to win with Mexico. They think Mexico is strong and they're not going to be able to. They're banking on Canada folding. And that's unfortunate. And he said, if I could give you one word of advice, get back to Canada, and as soon as you can, run that up the chain of the command with the Liberal government and say, hold the line.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. Today we're heading south to the city of brotherly love, the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Canadian municipal leaders were continuing important work to build international bridges. Earlier this month, two representatives from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Neal Comeau, chair of FCM's Rural Forum, and Alysson Storey, councillor from Chatham-Kent, Ontario, and FCM's Board of Director, traveled to Philadelphia to attend the National Association of Counties annual conference. Now, it's all part of FCM's commitment to strengthening cross-border collaboration with their American counterparts. From rural development to environmental stewardship, the goal was simple: share insights, align on challenges, and learn from one another, but also build relationships to address the ongoing trade disputes between the Trump administration and Canada. Chair Neal Comeau spoke to us after his attendance at the National Association of Counties annual convention about his conversations with municipal leaders from across the U.S. and what resonated most on the ground in Philadelphia. And with his attendance coinciding with the increase in tariffs on Canadian goods, we got his reaction from the delegates about what the ongoing trade challenges mean for building those all-important cross-border relationships. Councillor, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Always a pleasure to have you on the show to talk about your recent travels, whether it be to Washington, D.C., or just recently to the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the National Association of Counties, the FCM's counterpart down in the United States. I've got to ask a simple question. What brought you there this time?
You know what? Obviously following up in what we did in D.C. back in March, but this one was probably a little more focused, Chris, on just building better relations. We didn't have any real stage presence. I should say I didn't, but Alysson did. She had one day she was on stage. Just, networking, working the room, building better relations, continuing to connect with the people that we met last time, and really to see how things are going for them. Obviously, they're not only dealing with the tariffs, but they're dealing with the new big bill that they've encountered. And, if I could say one thing, Chris, is the experiences that they're experiencing and the trials and tribulations of a bill like that, it's the same thing we're dealing with here. I talked to a municipality that said they think in 2026, they're going to see an impact of $10 million on their budget as a result of that bill. That's a big number. And then we circled back to the tariff talk, and they're talking about a 25% reduction in tourism in that neck of the woods for them. So those are also big numbers, and those impacts are being felt across the board in their affordability. And you could see it, in Philadelphia. I've never been before, but just seeing there's a lot of issues with homelessness and the unhoused, and the drug opioid issue is front and center there as well. So I mean, it's common issues that we're facing in Canada.
While it is important to build on those relations that you started in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, what was it about this trip that made you feel more comfortable in those building of those relationships with your U.S. counterparts? Do you come back to Sturgeon County a little bit more feeling positive about what you've started in Washington and grown in Philadelphia?
Yeah, 100%. I think the more touch points you have, the better, obviously. And whether it's Alysson, Kathy, myself. Kathy, unfortunately, had to kind of bail last minute to deal with the fires that she's dealing with. But um, you know, none of us are going to turn away a chance to get in front of a crowd and try and influence that crowd, or a mic for that matter. We have to continue the work that we've started, and we know this is not a sprint. It's a marathon, unfortunately, at least for the next, I'd say, minimum of 4 years. But I would actually say that this is something that we've probably been lacking for whatever the last 8, 10 years, whatever that number would be before my time. The relationships between municipal councillors in the United States and Canada, and I would say in general, our two nations, we've kind of taken each other for granted for far too long. It's time to reconnect and get a better focus on how we can work together.
You started the process of working alongside and connecting with your U.S. counterparts because of the tariffs. And let's just call a spade
Yeah.
a spade. That was the sort of the catalyst of where we are today, of why it's important for the U.S. and Canadian municipalities to work together. What have you accomplished and what have you seen get accomplished with those partnerships being strengthened around the tariff files? Because when we first talked in when you were in Washington with Councillor Valentino and Councillor Storey, you talked about what you were bringing, the message that you were bringing to your U.S.
Yeah.
counterparts. Are they still on that same page? Because it seems like, and this is Chris Brown saying this right now, we are in this ebb and flow of there's tariffs one week, there's not tariffs a week after. So we just don't know. And it seems like tariffs isn't the hot topic anymore on the grand scheme. Do you get a sense that they want to continue the conversation, even if we don't know where we're going to be going in 24 hours from now?
Yeah, no, the uncertainty that we're facing, they're facing it as well, and they get it. They definitely do want to continue that conversation. I actually got invited at one of the receptions that we went to. I got invited to go to another conference, still associated with NACo in May. And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll come. I'm more than willing to get on stage and talk and to try and build more relations. They get it. I would say this time compared to last time, Chris, am I seeing a little bit of fatigue in them? Yeah, for sure. You're right. It's not as front and center as it was because now they're dealing with, obviously the deportation of people, and they're dealing with the bill, and there's some fatigue there. And I think, without, sounding alarms, I think for some of them, there's a little bit of buyer's remorse. They're kind of struggling with, we made this decision. This is our president, but we're struggling with some of the decisions that are being made and how they're affecting them. And we know that's affecting us here for that matter as well, and worldwide for that matter.
While the quote unquote big beautiful bill, as Donald Trump has so colloquially called it, was the topic of much discussion, from what I understand in our conversation so far. One thing that did happen while you were at the convention was a 35% tariff on Canadian goods going into the United States because of the fentanyl crisis, according to Donald Trump. Now, when you were there, this happened. Did you have the chance to speak to NACo leadership, to members, to mayors on border communities to talk about what is actually happening? Because you gave the Canadian perspective, and while you didn't have a stage, you were there speaking to the members.
Yeah, you know what? To be honest, most of the people I spoke with, to be blunt, they don't actually. They said the fentanyl is probably going across the border into Canada more than it's coming from Canada into the United States. They admitted that. They absolutely said that. They said this is not what it's about. I had a member tell me that he said, and this was really good as far as I was concerned. He said, you know what? His sources higher up in the government in the United States are saying they don't think they're going to win with Mexico. They think Mexico is strong and they're not going to be able to. They're banking on Canada folding. And that's unfortunate. And he said, if I could give you one word of advice, get back to Canada, and as soon as you can, run that up the chain of the command with the Liberal government and say, hold the line, because they feel that if you hold the line, that's what we need to do, in my opinion. But they also see it as well that you have to show that we're strong in Canada, and we're not going to fold over. That 35% number was front and center. We're talking with a lot of people. They couldn't believe the number again. And the goalposts changed. They actually said, like, we're expecting that's going to change by July
August
30th.
1st.
Yeah, like it's tough. Like that uncertainty doesn't breed confidence for anyone, whether it's in the United States and their market, and it doesn't breed confidence here. And especially foreign direct investment, coming into Canada, it's tough because a lot of people are just looking and going, maybe we're going to ride this out. We're going to wait this out because we don't know what he's going to do next. And by he, I mean the Trump administration, I should say.
Now, over the next few weeks, few months, as we head into August, we're going to be sitting down with some mayors from the south of our border to talk to them about the cross-border relationship between America and Canada. And I had an earlier conversation with a mayor from Illinois just yesterday, as of recording this, and he said he's hearing the same thing that you're hearing, that residents aren't there's fatigue around this issue. Now, I understand that NACo has been up in at FCM in May for their annual convention. You've gone down there. While it's important to attend conventions, is that all we can be doing? Is there more municipalities can be doing around this issue? Because it seems like just going to attend conventions and speaking to some members or being on stage and speaking to all members is great. But is there more that municipal leaders can be doing, in your opinion?
100%. And I personally plan on doing that. And that's continuing those conversations with and I'm going to say the friends that I have now maintained over the last 6 months that we've been dealing with this roughly. So building further contact with them, branching that network out and as well, getting on any media sources that we can in the United States. And I committed to, out of New Hampshire, I committed to go on a quarterly podcast to just follow the updates of where we're at and show the progress. And hopefully there is some progress in these tariff talks and how it's affecting both nations and really learning from each other. So I think it doesn't stop there. On Saturday, I fly out to Seattle and we're going to a conference called PNWAR, Pacific Northwest Economic Region. Again, that's what I'm going to be doing while I'm there. Not only selling the region of that I live in Sturgeon County, but selling Alberta, selling Canada for that matter, but also building better relations there too, because those are our close border contacts, Montana, Seattle, et cetera. Those areas are going to be there. So anything we can do, we have to continue. I still think it is all hands on deck as far as the Team Canada approach that, Prime Minister Carney and the premiers have been down before, and I was down with them back in March. This is ongoing, and I don't think it's going to stop. And it's unfortunate this is a situation we're in, but we have to learn and we have to move forward. And whether we like it or not, it's not going to go away. They're always going to be probably our biggest trade partner. But do we have to look at diversifying a little bit? Sure. Break down those interprovincial trade barriers? Absolutely. Those are the learnings we have to get, and we have to take the positive with the bad. And right now, the bad is that 35% number, but we hope it doesn't stay there.
I'm going to ask a very political question, but you're a political animal just like myself, so I feel like you prepared for this. Are you concerned that your message isn't getting to the right person? Because when we originally chatted, we talked about how mayors, councillors, commissioners, administrators would talk to their congressmen, who would talk to their senators, who would talk to the White House, who would talk to Donald Trump, who would have that change. Now, we are 6 months into this sort of ebb and flow, and it seems like it's been a lot longer. It seems like we chatted about a year ago, a year and a half ago about this, but it's only been 6 months, and it does not seem to be getting anywhere. Are you concerned are you confident you're talking to the right people right now?
Well, I am confident I'm talking to the right people, and I say that because, again, government of proximity, we are the people closest to the boots on the ground, and the information we're getting back from our residents and the businesses that are close to us and telling the impacts that they're seeing and talking about possible layoffs, and they're talking about mothballing expansions, et cetera, things like that. Those are horrific for our municipalities across Canada. And that doesn't matter what area of Canada we're speaking about. And when we get that across to our counterparts down in the United States, whether that be, National League of Cities or the Assembly of Mayors or NACo, all those touch points have a way up the chain of command. Are we getting it as fast as we would like? No, probably not. And I think that what it's going to take is, I think and this is just my spitball idea, I think by September, when you can really show statistics of how during the months of July and August tourism has tanked in the United States, and by all accounts from everyone I spoke with, it has. Um, and I think that, when you start seeing shelving products for the kids for Christmas and things like that of orders that haven't gone through, and we see the impacts where people are struggling for affordability even more than they are now, I think that's probably, and I'm going to guess that could be the tipping point for the Trump administration to realize. And they got to think about midterms coming up,
Yeah.
and this doesn't help right now. I mean, you look at his approval rating; it's falling drastically every day. And there are people that, again, Republicans that I spoke with that said, again, he's our president. We got to stick behind him. We don't necessarily agree with what he's doing right now, but we're between a rock and a hard place, and we know that, unfortunately, with their party politics down there, as you do, unfortunately, you toe the line, even though there are some people that are willing to step outside and say, no, this doesn't make any sense. Unfortunately, there's probably not enough at this point in time. I think that we have to just continue that, and hopefully the more voices we get. I mean, I've followed up since I got back from Philadelphia with my network of friends that I've made, and there's calls coming this week as well, in what we can do moving forward, and they have strategies that they think they can utilize as well.
So my final question for you before I let you go, because you were just at NACo, and as Alberta borders two states, from what I can figure out on a map, Montana and Idaho, if I'm doing my basic geography right here,
Yep.
did you have a chance to be able to speak to anyone from Montana or Idaho about how Alberta and those states can work together during this sort of uncertain economic times? Because I know Premier Smith has been working with the governor of Montana on a regular basis. He was just up here last summer. I think he was up here earlier this summer as well for Stampede. But did you happen to have a chance to meet with any of your cross-border relatives in those two states?
I did actually, with Montana representatives is who I met with. And those are relationships that are, expanding. I didn't unfortunately meet it with anyone from Idaho this time. Unfortunately, this time at the conference, it was a really big facility, and it was hard to really track people down at times. It did run into most of the same people that I expanded upon. And, I had some people even from Minnesota that I hadn't met before. And I just sat down with them at a reception, and they instantly were like, "Oh, we'd love to come to our convention when it's in Edmonton." And they said, "We'll sit on a panel if you want, or just to come and experience the convention and get better relations with the people that are close to that state as well." So that'd be like more Manitoba, if I remember correctly on geography there. They the willingness of those members is there, absolutely there.
Neal, Councillor, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me. Always a pleasure to do this, and always looking forward to the next conversation. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
During the conference, Councillor Storey also took part in key discussions about water protection, highlighting the critical work FCM does to safeguard the Great Lakes and Canadian border water systems. It's a clear reminder that while borders may define our nations, our environmental challenges and opportunities are shared. We sat down with Councillor Storey to hear her reflections on the conference and the big key takeaways, and what hope she has that the cooperation between FCM and the National Association of Counties can achieve under the uncertainty with a Trump administration. Councillor, thank you so much for sitting down with me and chatting about your most recent travels to beautiful Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the city of brotherly love, where you, alongside Neal Comeau, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Rural Forum Chair, met with the National Association of Counties members. I got to just ask a simple question to kick it off: is what did you hear?
Well, we heard a lot. The recent implementation or introduction of the reallocation bill, which is referred to by some as the triple B. I don't believe that's a proper term, so I'm going to use the technical term of the reallocation bill. That is just starting to sink in with folks. But what was interesting this time around was that there were so many issues that I'm facing in Chatham-Kent, where I live in Southern Ontario. There was lots of talk about worries about losing prime farmland to industrial activity, and why can't we redevelop brownfields into, more employment lands, affordable housing and homelessness, taxes, infrastructure, police, pipes, pavement. This really just resonated in the sense of, and it may be a good reminder that, the federal national political conversation is certainly one that we cannot ignore, and one that is very relevant right now. But the local government, the local impacts, the local needs really are quite similar no matter where you are. We talked to folks from Alaska, from Hawaii, West Coast to East Coast, and there were so many similarities no matter where they were from and where we were from. So that, I think, was a good reminder, because there's a lot of angst, some might even say ill will, depending on your perspective, between the US and Canada right now. And I'm not dismissing that at all. I think there's a lot that we should have concerns about. But in terms of a one-to-one personal relationship with folks doing their best as local elected officials, we're all kind of in the same boat.
You were there for the reallocation bill, but also there for when Donald Trump, the president, announced the increase of 35% on tariffs on Canadian goods. And that is a wide range. It's not just on one sector, it's on all goods that are going in from Canada into the United States. When that came down, did you get a sense that the mayors, Reeves, the administrators, the commissioners that you were talking to kind of changed their tone of how they were addressing you, and more of a, we're not doing this, it's Donald Trump doing this, it's not us that want this, it's him that wants this? Or did you get a sense that some were in favor of it, some were not?
Yeah, there was some of that. I would say that the allocation bill was front and center. The tariffs this time around were not as high a priority, I think, for folks this time as they were when we met them in March, because that was literally the first couple of days of that. The allocation bill is weighing heavily on folks, and having heard several briefings from NACo staff, their policy people from Washington, it's very serious, the impacts of that bill. But to the tariff piece, the folks we talked about tariffs with this time around were usually the folks that already were well aware of the impacts, especially the northern states, the states closest to the border. They're already seeing the impacts. They know it's not good for them or for us. In fact, a lot of them apologized, often saying, "We love Canada, we're so sorry." That kind of same, those same kind of statements that we heard when we were there in March. But I would say the tariff temperature for them, it's certainly very high for us and getting higher by the day, but for the American folks, the reallocation bill was really the item of main concern for them. And that's probably not surprising, because it's just been introduced, right? That's still very fresh and new for them. But the tariff piece, that's one reason why we wanted to go, was to make sure that that doesn't get forgotten, and that issue remains on people's front burner, because that's, again, that nothing has changed in the terms of that messaging, in terms of that impact. It's still going to affect thousands, tens of thousands of jobs across the US, just as much as it is in Canada. So we want to make sure that we continue to raise that. As long as the tariff conversation is happening at the federal level, we want it to be happening at the local level too.
One of the other reasons why you were there, I'm not sure if the other reason, but one of the main things that you did while at the NACo convention in Philadelphia was you gave a presentation on the work that you're doing and municipalities are doing around the Great Lakes and about water conservation. I'm assuming that during that time, and I know you should never assume, but I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you met with representatives from Michigan, Ohio, New York, Illinois, all the Great Lake states. Did you hear what they were doing on their side? Because if Canada's only doing their part around the Great Lakes conservation and stewardship around our Great Lakes, then it's only a one-sided issue. Are you hearing from the other side about what the American counterparts are doing around the Great Lakes as well?
Yes, that was why I found that a very useful panel to be part of. I am a Great Lakes councillor. This certainly isn't, I'm sitting about 20 minutes from Great Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie. So this is an issue that is, really right in my own backyard. But a huge portion of the Canadian population and the US population lives within an hour or two of a Great Lake. So this isn't just a regional issue. This is definitely, I would put forward, close to a national federal issue, just because of the number of people, the economic dollars, the impact that has from an environmental, climate change, economic impact. These are big, big numbers and big, big issues, but they are definitely working on it. Now, can be challenging, and again, which is another reason why I think FCM's connections with NACo are so useful, is that it still is very much, in many ways, a state-by-state approach. And so where I feel like we are working on it provincially, but I do think that it's more of a federal approach in Canada, where we know that individual provinces, for better or worse, should not be solely responsible for this. We need a unified approach to pollutants, to water safety, to water testing, to erosion and shoreline stabilization. That's a big issue in my area, and that was something that FCM actually, before my time, but FCM provided funding to do shoreline stabilization work, studies, which now in that baseline work that FCM helped us with now provided the baseline foundation for more work that we've done since then. So FCM has a role to play there in a big way. But from the US perspective, again, I made a little bit of a joke during my presentation that, the perch, the walleye, the pickerel, the fish that are in Lake Erie, for example, they don't care about borders. They don't care like pollution doesn't know borders, things like that. So these are issues that affect all of us. But I did sense that they were very much aware of that. And I think now that they're going to have this, it's a brand new forum called the Great Lakes Forum at NACo. They now have a more organized way of communicating and working together. So that's a really big first step, I think, for NACo. And since we are essentially part of it, I think it's the only bilateral forum / caucus at NACo, which is quite unique. And FCM staff in particular really facilitated that work for me to be able to join that panel and continue to meet with them. So I'm looking forward to that. As one of the speakers said, if you totaled up the Great Lakes region, that would be the third largest economy in the world. So that's no slouch. That's an important area. And the other issue that I think I would love to mention is that this was very, very, how should I say, the US folks in this forum were extremely insistent on mentioning the concerns they have about the need for fresh water, and how the southern states, in particular in the Southwest, like Arizona, Nevada, California, where they are experiencing very drastic and severe water shortages, that people are going to be coming for our water. That was the language they used. And I think they are quite concerned about that. And as a result, I'm like, if you're worried about that with your own fellow states, we probably should have that on our radar. I'm not saying we don't, but just the insistent and the fairly high level of concern they had with that, I think is something that we need to all be aware of, because fresh water is a limited resource and we have to protect it. So what does that look like moving forward? I think that's got to be really at the top of our priority list.
So how does the FCM fit into that scenario? Because you talk about how NACo has the Great Lakes Forum, which members of NACo got together along with yourself to talk about the Great Lakes. Does FCM have the same similar forum as well? Or is that something that you're going to be advocating because you sit on the board of directors, the table officers, the board of directors, sorry, but are you going to be advocating to set up a forum that you can have those ongoing discussions? Because you can't just stop the conversation once you get back from Philadelphia. This seems to not be going away, and the more time we waste on trying to meet next year or 6 months from now, it seems like the issue is going to get worse. So are you advocating, or does FCM already have that in place?
FCM does not have that in place yet. I think that's something that I would like to explore. Whether or not it means a separate entity within FCM is a good question. It's fairly new in NACo, and it would be something that I'm still wrapping my head around in terms of an FCM organizational context. it may not need to be its own separate caucus, but it could be even an informal. We have, the Ontario caucus, of which a lot of us, maybe all of us on the Ontario caucus board, are within close proximity to almost all of the Great Lakes. So it may not necessarily require a separate caucus, because that requires separate resourcing and often more organizational support, which I can't necessarily speak to in terms of an FCM corporate piece. But as anyone would in their community in this context, will be advocating for those needs to be met. But I do think now that some of those major, I wouldn't say they're red flags, maybe orange, yellow caution flags have been flown up by the NACo folks, I think that warrants a closer look by FCM and how we might want to approach that. And so it is something I'll be raising absolutely with my Ontario caucus colleagues to see their thoughts on it, and then continuing that conversation with FCM staff and see what that looks like. Because I know we have a very robust environmental, climate change adaptation, disaster mitigation policy work that we're doing with FCM. Maybe that fits into that better than a location based, but it's a great question, and it's something that I am definitely going to be percolating on, because I agree with you. I think it's something that we need to get ahead of. If that's what the US folks think is on the radar and on the horizon, we need to be thinking about it too.
I agree wholeheartedly. I want to turn because this is the second time you've gone down to the United States in the last 6 months as part of the FCM delegation. You went down earlier this year to Washington, D.C. with Neal Comeau, but also alongside third Vice President Kathy Valentino of FCM, who's also AMM President in Manitoba. What did you take away from this trip that you didn't take away from the last trip? Because you have to assume that you have to learn something new every single time you go down there. What do you take away from this trip that you didn't get from the last trip? Because people might say, why are you going down? Why is a municipal councillor from Chatham-Kent going down to Philadelphia to talk to mayors in Philadelphia?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think this time around, we really were able to reinvest in the conversations that we started in March. I know I have kept in contact since March with folks that I met in DC, and to see them again was really rewarding. A lot of them I would consider, friends and allies, and they offered opportunities for bilateral meetings with their communities. I spoke to a fellow who I met and who I was continuing to communicate with from New York State, a border, like in the border area of the St. Catharines, Fort Erie, Southern Ontario border crossing. I mean, he's very keen on keeping close ties with Canada. What really was reinforced to me this time is the importance of relationships. To come back to what I mentioned earlier, the national federal conversation is a challenging one, and there are, it's unpredictable. We might see it as unfair and unreasonable in some cases, but we have to, we aren't sitting at that table necessarily. FCM does a great job at informing discussions at that table, but I believe strongly that as a local official, I am best placed to speak to other local officials, whether they're in the US or they're in Canada, whether they're in Alberta or they're in Ontario. And we can speak from experience. I can speak to what happens when an automotive company leaves town overnight and takes several thousand jobs with them. Because that happened in Chatham-Kent, and that was 25 years ago, and only now as our population stopped shrinking and has now stabilized, I can speak firsthand about impacts. And those types of personal relationships, those type of personal conversations you can have at conferences and events like the NACo events are very valuable, because then they start to see Canadians as allies, as neighbors, as friends, as partners, which we know in Canada we are, but I don't think it's always, they're 10 times bigger. They aren't always thinking of us in the same context as we are thinking about them. So it was a very useful experience to be able to represent my community as one that is being impacted actively by tariffs and will continue to be. And I can speak firsthand about them, but it's also very valuable as a national representative through FCM to be able to do that because they really inform each other. And that continuity with Neal being there, with me being there, we now can continue those conversations. We're building trust, we're building credibility. FCM has done an excellent job, FCM staff in particular, at setting up these meetings and keeping a very open-minded, non-partisan approach, which I think is key right now. And because we don't know what'll happen in 2 years in the US midterm. We don't know what'll happen in the next election. And so we want to be able to have those relationships intact, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, when perhaps those conversations at the federal level start to change, which they might. They might not, but either way, we want to have those lines of communication wide open. And that doesn't happen overnight. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I found it very valuable. FYI, Philadelphia in July is very hot and humid. It's very hot and humid where I am in July, but that was next level. But it's a great city. I love visiting. We got a warm welcome as Canadians, and I highly recommend. Folks are doing their own thing in terms of travel and tourism. I completely respect that. But if you ever find yourself in Philly, you won't regret it. It's a great place to be, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
One other person that you did happen to run into while down in Philadelphia was not a mayor, not a councillor, not an administrator, not a commissioner, but a senator, United States Senator from Massachusetts,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yes.
I have to ask a very simple question before I let you go did you happen to ask her about what's going on with these tariffs and give the Canadian perspective to her? Or was it a quick photo opportunity, then she had to run away? What was the meeting like?
Well, it was very quick. We were actually shooting some FCM videos in the courtyard of Philadelphia City Hall, which is a beautiful building with this really interesting courtyard in the middle, which is open to the public. So there's lots of people going in and out. And I was shooting one, and out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, that looks like Elizabeth Warren. And she's just walking. She was, not surprisingly, she was walking with purpose, but she was dressed in casual clothes, and she was with her husband. No visible security around her, although I suspect they were there. They just weren't obvious. And so I thought, because Canadians were often like, I don't want to bug her and whatever. But then I thought, no, it's Elizabeth Warren. I think she is amazing, personally. So I thought, oh, this is once in a lifetime thing. So Olivier, one of my FCM colleagues, had his phone ready, and I went up and like, Miss Warren, I really admire the work you're doing. I'm a female elected official, and I think I just sort of had a little bit of like, sort of right out of my mouth there, but she was very kind. She was very friendly. She's like, let's take a selfie. So she knows the drill. I think I got out, please be gentle with the tariffs. I think I might have got about 5 words out about the tariffs. And, but she was clearly going somewhere, but she was very friendly. She was very outgoing and polite. And her husband was too. He stuck around when she was like, thank you. Have a great day. And she kept on walking. Her husband was like, oh, so where are you from in Southwestern Ontario? So he hung around and started chatting. And then I think he sort of looks like, oh, gotta go. They were both super friendly and very cool, very unexpected, but wonderful little memory that I will have of this particular trip, because I think she's great and very much a powerful advocate for her constituents, no question, and her state. So yeah, that was a fun little moment for sure.
Councillor, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Always a pleasure to sit down with you and talk about what you're doing on behalf of FCM, but also your community. Looking forward to the next conversation. So thank you so much.
That sounds great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the world of municipal politics when it comes to cross-border relations. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platforms or by visiting us on YouTube at Cross Border Network. To learn more about the people and the communities that we feature on this show and our sister shows, visit us online at crossborderinterviews.ca. That's crossborderinterviews, all one word, .ca. Now, your support means the world to us. So if you can, share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversations going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.